Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our regional geriatric rounds today. Today, Kelly Kay will be presenting on the Senior Friendly Caregiver Project. Kelly Kay is an experienced health leader, bringing more than 30 years of health system experience to her role as Executive Director of Ontario's Provincial Geriatrics Leadership Office. This office is focused on providing system infrastructure for clinical geriatric services in the province. Kelly's past work has included direct clinical practice in geriatric and psychiatric nursing, clinical administration in primary care, health professional education, health administration at the national, provincial, and local levels, as well as roles in health policy. Kelly has a proven track record in leading regional collaborative initiatives in the areas of health system planning and design, primary care, and geriatrics. She has developed curricula in the areas of interprofessional practice and health systems for professionals and therapeutic communications for personal support workers. Kelly is currently completing PhD studies at the University of Toronto in collaboration with the Institute for Life Course and Aging. Her research interests include health system co-design with older adults and interprofessional team-based care models. She is an enthusiastic advocate who fosters collaboration with older adults, health professionals to create new possibilities for integrated, person-centered care for older adults and their caregivers living with complex health needs in Ontario. Welcome, Kelly Kay.
Thank you, everyone, for having me back. This is the second time I've had the chance to speak to the group of the Regional Geriatric Program of Eastern Ontario. And this is a project that I'm very excited to talk about. So thank you for asking me to come and share information with you. You've got some reaction buttons in your I think they're enabled for you. Can I get a thumbs up from people if you've seen this work before? Just see if I can see any thumbs up. I see some familiar faces. Okay, so just a few people. That's an interesting comment in itself. So I'm so delighted to be able to talk about this work with you. So I'll spend a little bit of time just reviewing the objectives of this presentation, and then I'll introduce both PGLO and the background to this project. I'll walk you through the co-design and content development. And I know that you might be anxious to get right on to the resources, and I'll get there too, but I think it's important to understand the journey. It could be very helpful in your own work as you take on projects as well. I'll share the reactions from caregivers and some of what the work is that we're doing to sustain the gains we made through this initial project. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that this is really a team effort. So you'll get to see some of the people who are involved. So what I'd like to accomplish with today in this presentation is to describe the process of creating a major initiative with multiple organizational partners and caregivers who are living with complex health conditions. And at the same time, I'll present the resources and the results of this major initiative for us. And we refer to that package of resources as caregiving strategies. So let me orientate you a little bit to Provincial Geriatrics Leadership Ontario. We've been created to help coordinate the provincial infrastructure for clinical geriatrics care. And if you didn't know, there's about 2,500 providers who do work similar to yours around the province, around 400 programs and services. And all of us, for those who are joining today who work within specialized geriatric services, know that we're focused particularly on the older adult who lives with complex health conditions. PGLO tries to help to synthesize perspectives across clinical geriatric services, and those include the perspectives of care of the elderly, primary care, geriatric medicine, geriatric psychiatry, and the interprofessional team. And we're working together to drive clinical excellence, build system capacity, and advance seniors' health policy. Now, this includes regional and local networks, and I want to just acknowledge that the RGP of Eastern Ontario is a major contributor and an important regional network that's part of Provincial Geriatrics Leadership Ontario. We're funded by the Ministry of Health, and so we have a mandate from the ministry to carry out some of our activities. And recently, and what's relevant in this project is that we assumed the assets of the Regional Geriatric Programs of Ontario, a network that existed prior to the development of PGLO and who has sunset its operations in November. And so some of this work that I'm going to talk about with you today started under their leadership and has continued under the new entity. Now, the role of specialized geriatric services is reflected on the right. If this information is helpful to you, sometimes I think it's helpful to clarify for those who are not familiar with our work, where we fit into the system. And I found that this particular graphic has been helpful when we're talking with our colleagues who are developing older person-centered programs and services at the Ontario Health Team level. So you feel free to use it if it's helpful to you. So let me tell you a little bit about this project. The project started off with the title, the Senior Friendly Caregiver Education Project. And this project has co-designed educational resources for the use of family and friends who may be caring for an older adult living with frailty or complexity. We used a knowledge to practice framework to get there. And we developed this in partnership with 6 regional geriatric programs, and the RGP of Eastern Ontario was one of them. And I can recall the conversation. It was 2018, and we were at a business meeting for another purpose. And this grant from the Ministry of Health had been made available to provide and prepare and develop resources that could support caregivers in acknowledgement of the strain that caregivers are experiencing. And so we really had a very informal discussion around the table to say, what could we do that would be helpful? And what could we put together in order to secure a grant? And we put together a grant application that was really focused on practical information and a broad provincial reach. And we were very fortunate to receive funding from the Ministry of Health. We had a generous grant for 2 years that ended March 2020. And upon the completion of that, we were able to integrate this as core business of the PGLO. So I'll speak to that when I talk about sustainability in a moment. So what you see here is the result of that generous funding that we received from the Ministry of Health, but also a bunch of partners and colleagues sitting around saying, how could we be helpful? So I bring that to you to share the perspective of what's possible. And so why did we undertake this project? This won't be news to you. We know that there are many caregivers in Ontario who are caring for older family members, often their parents, and they could be family members, friends, neighbors, and that their support is critical to the individuals that they're caring for, but also our healthcare system. And we prepared this project before the pandemic experience. And at that time, if caregivers were reporting they were overwhelmed, I'm sure that you'll be hearing that their experiences are even more so as a result of the pandemic. And so we need their contribution. We need to support them. It certainly has a financial contribution to the healthcare system. But as colleagues, as I mentioned earlier, we really wanted something practical, nothing theoretical, but hands-on practical information that caregivers of older adults living with complex conditions could take up and use. I mean, some of it has certainly got a basis in theory, but it's really translated into practical tools and resources. So that's why we started this project in the first place. Now, let me just share a little bit about the background of where we came from and how we got to where we are. And some of the images that you're seeing here are the stages of the co-design project. So you can see a few images on this, this backdrop of this slide, stickies, people in rooms, in the good old days when we could come together in person. So the project goal, when we set out in 2018, was that caregivers of frail seniors and content experts would plan and co-design a program in which 25,000 caregivers would receive educational content through multimodal forms of delivery, a very ambitious goal. We started with the work that has been done provincially around senior-friendly care, and that was a major underpinning of our beginning steps. There had been some prior work done to think about topics that kept coming up from caregivers that were quite important and where educational content might be helpful in their own care. And those 7 topics were delirium, cognition, nutrition, pain, continence, social engagement, and mobility. And you'll see that the names change as we spend more time receiving feedback and working with caregivers. So that language changes slightly in the final design. We had several deliverables. Certainly the co-design sessions themselves were a deliverable. And we also, the educational curriculum that was developed was another deliverable. And as well, the connection points with existing resources. There was really an effort not to duplicate, but rather to complement. And then, of course, there were several final reports prepared. One of the things I wanted to mention about the scope of this project was this was at a time when the grants were specifically exclusive of dementia care. So although we did hear from caregivers that they were interested in learning more about dementia care, because so many others were doing work in that area, the ministry had confined these grants to non-dementia related topics. And so that explains the distinction. So the outcomes of this project would be, and this is what we were hoping to measure, we wanted to know that, or we wanted to measure reports from caregivers that they felt meaningfully engaged in the planning of the education, and that they also experienced positive changes in participating in the education, as well as being able to care for themselves and having an improved sense of well-being. We also hoped that the people they were caring for, if they could, would report that they were also experiencing improved well-being due to their caregivers' enhanced ability to provide care. And we also hoped that caregivers would report that on behalf of the person they were caring for, they might feel less inclined to go to the emergency department for conditions that may not require emergency services, or to seek premature admission to long-term care. So very ambitious outcomes. I'll share with you how close we got to achieving those. So our co-design process had a number of steps. We tried to be as expansive as possible, mindful of our provincial, our desire to reflect provincial experiences. So we engaged 133 caregivers in 10 co-design sessions. I'll show you a map in a moment about where they were located. And we started with the 7 senior-friendly care topics. Those sessions were facilitated by local facilitators, and 78 local facilitators participated, and many from the RGP of Eastern Ontario. So some of you may have been part of that initial stage of bringing together content, caregivers, and facilitators to puzzle over where to go. The topics were introduced, they were reviewed and debated. We brought some initial thinking forward, but really were open to hearing what to do with it and where to go with it. And in each case, caregivers expressed they wanted more information on every topic that was presented. And as well, they identified other topics that were important to them beyond the 7. The feedback shaped the content. It wouldn't look the way it does now if we did not do these sessions. And there were discoveries that we made along the way that were informed by caregivers that we wouldn't have made without them. We produced a report about what we heard, and some of the things we did here is how caregivers wanted to learn and how they wanted to connect with others. So this is a map of the distribution of the learnings or the sessions that we held, the co-design sessions that we held. We tried to have as broad a reach as we could. And some of what we heard was how caregivers preferred to learn. And you can see the top 3 were they wanted support groups, they wanted online information, and they wanted booklets and pamphlets. And support groups were out of scope of our activity. So we focused our attention on online and booklets and pamphlets, that sort of kind of educational material. And it's interesting, I'll speak about an innovation that's emerging that addresses the support group matter. Here's a bit of an example of how the feedback unfolded. So on the left-hand side, you'll see mobility was one of the topics that we'd included, and we presented preliminary information in a toolkit that the co-design sessions considered. And then they gave feedback on it. They had critique in each case. In this case, they were noting that there was some assessment and care plan that didn't seem linked. And then they said what they wanted to learn. They wanted to learn how to transfer. They wanted to figure out where the resources were. And then they also told us what they thought was missing. And so we did a summary for each of the topics to receive their feedback and make good use of it in the actual content design. So the development went on from there. We caregivers and health providers co-developed the curriculum. That was overseen by an education working group. And then we had that content reviewed and refined by experts. And the end result was the Caregiving Strategies resource package, which includes a handbook, an online course, and a website. And the experience that we leveraged was vast. We started with the work that began with the RGP of Toronto, and that's where the Senior Friendly Care 7 topics came from. And this work is really aligned with what you'll see as clinical content that you'll find on the RGP of Toronto's website around seven similar topics. So there's clinical information for clinicians, and the caregiver information aligns quite well. We also had input from RGPs and specialized geriatric services from across Ontario. They formed the steering committee, and you could see those 78 facilitators that worked with us were recruited and participated through our network. And as well, they used their local networks for the co-design and promotion. So the caregivers that participated, the 133, were located by many of the regional geriatric programs and specialized geriatric services. We had participation on the educators working group, and as well, some of our colleagues from across the province served as content experts. We worked closely with McMaster. It was an interesting connection. They supported us by connecting us with content designers. We were designing content for the very first time in a digital environment, and that was different for us. They also had a very complementary piece of work that they had completed that was the result of a different grant several years prior called Caregiving Essentials. And what we found when we were doing our co-design sessions is that there were many topics coming up about self-care and what caregivers need to know for themselves beyond the practical topics, the practical care topics that we'd identified. And so rather than duplicating efforts, we joined forces and co-promoted each other's work so that if someone was participating in the Caregiving Strategies course, we let them know about the McMaster Caregiving Essentials work. The content did not duplicate, but it certainly augmented, and it was a good package of information. And then we also worked with the Ontario Caregiver Organization. They were just forming at this time when we were getting this project going, and they helped to promote the work. And we were careful to stay connected so that their efforts and our efforts were not duplicative. And finally, we also worked with the Ontario Personal Support Worker Association. PSWs participated in the beta testing of the online content, and as well, the association took up our content and included it in some of their own information that they share with personal support workers. And so this was sort of the end result. You can see the names have changed. So mobility became staying active, and continence, nobody wanted to talk about continence. So continence became bladder health. That was the language that was more, that caregivers felt was more appropriate for their situation. And delirium became changes in thinking with a focus in the brackets on delirium so that there wouldn't be confusion around dementia. And that language was language that resonated with caregivers. So let me tell you now a little bit about our results. So remember, we wanted to make sure that the co-design process was also well received. And we found that in the focus groups, caregivers felt that they'd contributed valuable information. We had very good, high degree of agreement around that. And following the beta testing, about 78% of those that participated still felt that they could see their contributions in the development of the education resources. So we felt that we had achieved that, some success in this area. The website, you can find the website, the link is right here, and the website has a main page. It's a mini site on our main site. And it sort of seems to stand alone once you enter into it. And that was intentional so that caregivers could find their way in and then move around in a site that looked like a site for them. And so these are the topics that are prominently displayed on the main page of the Caregiving Strategies website. And then you can click into the content, which largely replicates the handbook. And you can spend time on the website and review content and download single-page PDFs. If you're only interested in nutrition, you can find single-page information about nutrition rather than downloading a whole handbook of multiple pages. And the Caregiving Strategies Handbook itself is available in 4 languages. And I really want to give a shout out to the RGP of Eastern Ontario, who assisted with the translation of the handbook into French. We couldn't have done it without you. And then the interactive course also picks up on the content, displaying it in a easy to read and attractive way, and then providing activities throughout. So in this section here on pain, there's an opportunity to complete a reflection journal and think about pain and ask sort of questions of yourself. And as well have a tool that you could walk away with that you could use when you're caring for somebody. Our evaluations have been ongoing. We're currently in the midst of a course and just about coming to the end of it, and the current feedback remains positive. And we've asked questions that are pertinent to the original objectives. And you can see people do feel that they know more. They do feel that they're able to apply the strategies, that they have more confidence and are better able to care for themselves. One thing that was probably a little bit unfair to ask, and a little more difficult to evaluate, is whether the person that they're caring for also experiences a sense of wellness. But we do have some responses that indicate that is indeed happening. And so our reach, this was very interesting to us to sort of look and see how far afield we were reaching. This is since the beginning of the project. We have had over 17,000 visits to the site that I gave you a little snapshot of. And that's some of the metrics include the sessions on the site. So there's nearly 10,000 sessions with 25% of people coming back multiple times. Over 20,000 page views. And maybe for your interest, what caregivers seem to be particularly interested in, top 2 page views right now have been pain and delirium. We've had over 900 people registered for the 4 course offerings. We did offer 2 during the pandemic, and we had over 400 people participating during the pandemic. So because we were already set up to go for something virtual, it was very seamless, and people continued to take advantage of that. 95% say they would recommend the course to another caregiver, and you saw some of the results about how they feel about what they've learned. I think the idea of reach is really interesting, and I wanted to share this information with you and then draw your attention back to the fact that when I asked you at the beginning how many of you have heard about this, only 2 thumbs went up. So, we had the budget at the time to use a number of strategies for outreach. We went across the province with email and with presentations. We also had intentional mailings, websites, newsletters, posters, social media, and we also had paid advertising. And so the outreach to populations that might be relevant was substantial. It came at a cost, of course. That kind of marketing campaign is expensive. And you can see how it's something that has to be continued, because even as we've made all of this effort, 2 people today were aware of this work. So it's just a sign that even with your best efforts and a generous budget, which we had at the time when the grant was still running, it still is a constant. It is a constant activity to let people know about your work. And so I'll share a little bit about what caregivers thought and things from their own words. People were expressing that they found 3 or 4 things they didn't know. Some expressed that they might not need all this information now, but they appreciated it because then if they were in a crisis, they knew where to look and they knew that they had some information they could rely on. They also appreciated the online because it is, and I've heard from a number of caregivers that it is difficult to get out to support sessions and to learning sessions. And so being able to access online, although there are barriers for some, those that indicated that they participated in it really appreciated it. And people found things that they didn't know, and it was nice to know that there were others in the same boat. And it's an interesting thing that when we were holding the co-design sessions to actually prepare the content, many times, or most of those co-design sessions turned into support groups. People really just needed an opportunity to come together and share and talk about their experience, and they were very meaningful sessions. People found that things got put into perspective, they were reinvigorated as caregivers, and they found that the quality of the course was simple, easy to navigate, and that they could set their own pace, and they liked the handbook. It's formatted with spiral binding, so it can lay flat if you're trying to do something, and people appreciated the design. And even during the pandemic, people found that they learned something in this person's response. Although their parent has gone into a nursing home, they're still able to use some of the strategies, and they understand what's happening for their parent. So I'll move now to talking about how we sustain the gains. And there were 5 tools that we used to help us sustain this project. One was a champion program. So we connected with many of those same facilitators and keen caregivers to make sure that they were equipped with the information to help spread the word and find the resources in case they wanted to connect somebody. We also actively created a spread the word strategy. So we have a page on our website with easily printable materials that anyone could use if they're hosting an event and they want to make caregivers aware of this resource that's easy to access. We had a train the trainer session, a recorded webinar to train personal support workers in the use of resources. Sometimes you make resources like this that you intend to hand out to caregivers, and they actually, sometimes you need to talk it through and have a way of explaining the materials to caregivers so that they can be taken up more readily. We also created guidelines for the online course so that the course is moderated at the moment, includes a discussion forum. And so we have a paced approach to that so that a moderator can connect with those that are online. And as well, we had a number of, I showed you many of them, but we also had a number of network and strategic partners involved who also take up and share and print and link. The handbook itself, we distribute the print-ready copy of the material so that local RGPs and others can print off a bunch of copies if they'd like to make them available. It's always a good use of end your money, is to print handbooks. And some additional strategies were adding new topics. We've had a wonderful submission from a researcher who had prepared a module for us in wound care, and that's just going through review. We've heard from caregivers that they pride themselves on being able to care for their loved one without them developing any wounds, and that's a source of pride, and they'd like to know how to do that properly. We're also looking at ways to increase access. At the moment, the course is run at set times, and it's been about twice a year, but we're looking at sort of a rolling intake, which may change the moderation. So we're just having a think through about that. We have a new partnership with Age Friendly London, and they're just a heads up that they're putting out the call very soon for the Age Friendly Community Planning Grants, the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility. And Age Friendly London put in for a grant, and they're going to be using this content and they've hired a couple of facilitators through this grant, and they'll be delivering a hybrid model. So taking the online content and having participants do an online portion and then meet to have a virtual session and one day, hopefully, an in-person session. That'll satisfy, you recall back to the chart I showed you, that'll satisfy that desire of caregivers to have some in-person support as well. And that's such a key part of their work, but also focused support. I hear from many caregivers that they're not comfortable sitting around a circle and sharing, but having some focused support as they grapple with content about pain, for example, could be a very interesting addition to this work. It is now the core business of PGLO, and I think that was key. PGLO was just starting up at the right time, and I was a common link between this project and PGLO, and could make sure that this was in the budget. Not to the same extent. The grant itself is larger than the budget of PGLO, so, but really so that there at least was a budget line for concerted effort to support this work on an ongoing basis. And then we've made linkages to other work. So for example, we helped to co-produce the recent delirium standard put out by Ontario Health. And the sessions that are to come, I think in September, there'll be a session that's being led by the Ontario Caregiver organization around the caregiver and patient information related to the standard. And this is another opportunity for us to include the content we've developed that speaks to, we call it in this work, changes in thinking, but it's related to delirium. And so really, we're now on to acknowledgements. You can see this team of talent that really helped to support this work. So many of our colleagues around the province, and the core group that has the stars were the group that formed members of the steering committee and also participated in many other ways as well. And then we had a fabulous project team that we were able to hire with the grant, and they just had so much energy and creativity and taught me many things about how to launch and mount such a project and make it so successful. So can't say enough about their contribution. And I would be remiss if I did not mention our fabulous educators working group, also tons of talent from direct experience to educators to others from other organizations. So we were very fortunate to get connected to this group of talent as well. And that's really it. I'll take questions if there's any questions.
Thanks so much, Kelly. That was a great presentation on a fantastic project and initiative. Do we have any questions? You can either share in the chat box your questions, or you can use the reaction buttons, the raise hands, or a clapping emoji, whichever works for you, and ask Kelly Kay some questions about this great project.
Hi, Dean. So the innovative support group thing that I mentioned, I was going to mention is the age-friendly London work. So their translation of the work from only an online course to include a paced series of in-person sessions as well is the way that we're handling the request for support. Because if you bring caregivers together in a room, they will support each other. And we found that through the whole co-design process, that the conversations, there was many tears, there was Kleenex on every table at every event, and people came away feeling supported. And a lot of the feedback we got on the co-design was, it was such a supportive event. So these sessions that Age Friendly London is organizing that will complement our online course. And what will happen is the person will register to participate in the Caregiving Strategies program. They'll work on their own on the online course, and then once a week they'll have a session in person and they'll discuss the content. But by coming together, they will support each other innately, but they'll have a focus for the conversation. Because some people have told us that they're very uncomfortable just talking about themselves. So having a focus still allows people to support one another and talk about difficult things. And I think it's an innovative way to go about support. Now, there's lots of other support groups that are out there that are critically important, and Ontario Caregivers Organization offers many of those in different innovative ways. So Dean, I hope that helps answer the question. I'm not suggesting that what Age Friendly London is doing is technically considered a support group, but I think it will have the same effect. Thanks, Iona. So you say you love the rebranding of the names. Do you see these terms as being the new way to refer to these conditions with caregivers and clients? Are there more than the three that you shared? I hadn't really thought beyond the experience that we had here about how to communicate about these topics. I think the lesson that I would take away is that I think we have to do the translational work of the experience of the caregiver into the clinical information we want to impart. So there weren't any others that came up, although there were other topics where caregivers expressed a lot of interest. And one that sticks in my mind is sleep. They're very interested in knowing what to do about promoting sleep, because as you can imagine, when a person who doesn't sleep is really tremendously burdensome for a caregiver. But those were the only three where they preferred different language to describe the problem they were facing. But it's a good caution to think about what words we could use that could make it easier. Because until we said bladder health, nobody wanted to talk about continence. Are there any other questions? Great. Hi, Nandini. Nice to see you.
Hi, Kelly. I put my questions into the chat box. Thanks.
Thank you. So it's interesting, the sustaining the gains, which was the most effective. I think it does come down to relationships. So I think having the RGPs and the SGS colleagues know about this content and take it forward. So for example, you all today now know about this information and can be referring caregivers to the content or the online courses, or asking them what else they're concerned about, so that can feed back to us, so we can be developing more content. So it was largely the champions within the RGPs and the SGS entities that have really helped to sustain the knowledge of the information. But even today's a good example where we still have work to do to get the word out. And I did, it's worthy of another mention. Thank you. The Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility is planning to issue a new funding call for age-friendly community grants. So if this is something that you'd want to include in a grant, as a way to facilitate, like Age Friendly London is doing, you want to have some local sessions or facilitated local sessions and replicate what they're doing, they're happy to share. And that was something that they funded through an Age Friendly community grant. So I know that there's some interest from a colleague of yours in the Cornwall area I've had a chance to chat with. And so I think there is some interest to have some in-person sessions, and there's no need to develop content. We'll have it all here for you to take up and use.
Well, if there's no other questions, then we just want to thank you again so much, Kelly, for coming and presenting on this great project. And hopefully we can help to continue to promote it and get the message out there that it's available, and get this information to the caregivers. We just wanted to let everyone know our next regional geriatric rounds will not be until Monday, September 27th, but we have our regional geriatric refresher days coming up on Wednesday, June 16th and Wednesday, June 23rd. And that's $50 for both days. And there are 8 presenters who will be speaking at those days. So if you'd like to register, you can register on our website at www.rgpeo.com. Thanks so much for coming today, and we hope you all have a great day.